All right, let's get started. The first thing I want to do is make a new project. And this is a pretty easy first step. All you have to do is give your project a name and click Finish. Project doesn't have any contents right now, so the next thing to do is add a class to the project. And this is almost as easy as the last step. Give your class a name and check this box to generate a main method for your class. So we have our project now. We have a class with the main method. The only thing left to do is actually make this program do something useful. And the useful thing I want to do is display a dialog on the screen. We just saw an example of a dialog. This is a dialog. It is a temporary window that you would use usually to prompt for user input. And the reason I want to create a dialog is because in Java, dialogs allow for special styling that's going to be useful for this project. So we create a dialog by creating an instance of the JDialog class, and JDialog has a constructor that takes no arguments. I've got an error right now because I haven't imported the JDialog class, but this first quick fix is the right one. So we've created an instance of the JDialog class. Let's see what happens when we run the program. Nothing happened. And that's because by default, dialogs are not visible. You have to explicitly call the setVisible method, setVisible method on your dialog. So let's rerun the program now. Great, we can see the dialog. Well, it's actually just a title bar. By default, the dialog doesn't have any size. So let's work on that next. Fortunately, it's pretty easy. The dialog class has a setSize method. You can see it has an overload that takes two ints. The first one is the width in pixels, and the second one is the height in pixels. So if we rerun the program now, we get a nice 400 by 400 dialog. One more thing I want to point out is you can see I have the option to terminate the program at this point, even though I just closed the dialog. And that's because by default, closing that dialog does not close the program. You have to explicitly tell Java that that's the behavior you want. For now, I'm just going to manually close the program. I've got one more from the last time I ran it. All right, the final thing I want to do is a small refactoring. I want to pull out these 400s into a variable at the top of this class. Static because this isn't a property of instances of the class, it's a property of the class as a whole. And final because I don't want the value of this variable to change throughout execution of the program. It's a constant, it's not actually a variable. And I put the name in all caps because that's a common pattern to put the name in all caps when you have a static final variable. So why am I doing this? Two reasons. One is readability. If you just have 400s, it can sometimes be confusing to understand what those numbers actually represent. In this case, it's not that confusing because they're the arguments to a setSize method, but other places it's a lot more readable to see something like dialog size. You can immediately tell what that means instead of just a number. And the other reason for this is maintainability. If I were to use this number elsewhere, say I have another place where I create a dialog of the same size, and at some future point I want to change that size, say from 400 to 500, if I'd had those numbers sprinkled throughout my code, I would have to go to every place I use that number and update it. In this case, I just update that number in one place, and anywhere I use it in my code will automatically consume those updates. Other than that, the behavior is exactly the same as before. This will create a 400 by 400 dialog.